In 2022, a director quit a $340 million movie. 5 days into filming. He didn't explain why. Neither did the studio. For 3 years, nobody outside that production knew what really happened. One quiet exit. One missing explanation. One franchise that's been stuck ever since. Here's the part that doesn't add up at first. This isn't the story of a franchise that flopped. This is the story of how Fast and Furious became so successful that success became the thing that destroyed it. Let's go back to when this felt unstoppable. For 2 decades, the Fast and Furious franchise did something almost no other series pulled off. It kept getting bigger, movie after movie, year after year, with no real slump. It started small. Street racers, stolen DVD players, a scrappy 2001 action movie nobody expected to spawn anything more. The third film, Tokyo Drift, actually struggled. It made less than half of what the first 2 films had made domestically. For a moment, in 2006, this franchise looked like it might just quietly end there. Vin Diesel wasn't even in that movie. Not really. He'd skipped it almost entirely, trading a brief cameo for the film rights to a different franchise, Riddick. Justin Lin directed Tokyo Drift anyway. He stayed on with the series and pushed Universal to bring the original cast back for the next entry. It worked. Diesel and Walker returned for Fast and Furious in 2009, and the numbers climbed right back up. By Fast 5 in 2011, it wasn't about racing anymore. It was heists, family, physics-defying stunts. Dwayne Johnson joined the cast, and the series pulled an entire bank vault through the streets of Rio. And it worked. Spectacularly. Furious 7 grossed $1.5 billion worldwide, off a $190 million budget. One of the most profitable blockbusters of the decade. But here's the detail people forget about that number. Furious 7 wasn't just a box office record. It was a funeral. Paul Walker died in a car crash in 2013, mid-production. The studio finished his scenes using his own brothers as stand-ins. CGI rebuilt his face, frame by frame. Roughly 350 shots built around an actor who was already gone. Audiences didn't just watch that movie. They grieved with it. Furious 7 wasn't just the franchise's commercial peak, it was its emotional peak. Those 2 things were tied together. The studio was about to spend a decade trying to recreate that feeling anyway. The problem is, you can't schedule grief for release weekend. So how do you top a funeral that made $1.5 billion? You can't write your way to that number. You can only try to outspend it. And that one decision shapes everything that follows. Chase the high with bigger budgets instead of better scripts. This franchise had just spent 2 decades proving one idea. If audiences love something enough, bigger always means better. The problem is, eventually, bigger becomes the only thing you know how to do. By 2017, 2 things were true. This franchise made more money than almost anything else in theaters, and behind the scenes, it was quietly falling apart. The Fate of the Furious was filming. On set, 2 of its biggest stars stopped speaking to each other. Entirely. Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel. The public line was vague. Creative differences. The real version, according to people who were there, was an outright ego war. Here's why that mattered so much. Johnson wasn't just a co-star by then. He'd become one of the franchise's biggest global draws. And Diesel wasn't just the lead. He was also a producer with real creative authority. So this wasn't 2 actors who didn't get along. This was a star clashing with the man who controlled the franchise's direction. Johnson walked. He took his spin-off, Hobbs and Shaw, and left the mothership behind in 2019. And here's the detail that should have really worried Universal. Hobbs and Shaw made $84 million in real profit. That sounds like a random statistic. It isn't. A spin-off. No Vin Diesel, no Dom, no Letty, no family speech. It cost $200 million and grossed $760.7 million worldwide. That's a cleaner profit than the next 2 mainline films combined would manage. This one number exposed a problem Universal didn't realize they had yet. The Diesel-led series kept going without Johnson. And it kept making less money. Every single time. F9 opened domestically to $70 million in 2021. Furious 7 had opened to $147 million. just 6 years before. Less than half. You could blame the pandemic for some of that opening number. Theaters weren't full. Audiences were cautious. But 2 years later, theaters were back. The pandemic excuse was gone. And Fast X still opened lower than F9 domestically, even with a bigger budget. Even with a bigger marketing push. That's not a pandemic problem. That's a pattern. By Fast X, nearly 80% of total box office was coming from overseas. At home where this franchise was born, it was already fading. One car, one family. One franchise quietly losing its home crowd. There's a reason audiences started pulling back. F9 is the movie where this franchise literally launched a car into space. Not metaphorically. A modified Pontiac, strapped to rocket boosters, flying out of Earth's atmosphere to hack a satellite. One critic called it the moment the franchise stopped being stupid fun and crossed into insulting. Even some of the people who loved it admitted the same thing. This was the joke fans had been making for years, and the studio actually did it. There's a version of escalation that works. Bigger heists, bigger stunts, higher stakes, and there's a different version. One that just tells the audience the writers stopped trying to make any of this believable. By the time Fast X needed to top that, the franchise had already spent its believability. There was nowhere left to escalate to that didn't look like self-parody. The franchise had spent a decade trying to manufacture something Furious 7 got by accident. Bigger stunts were never going to be a substitute for real stakes. Which brings us to April 2022. Day 1 of production on Fast X. Justin Lin had spent 16 years building this franchise. Tokyo Drift, the 4th film. Fast 5, the 6th film, F9. The architect of everything that made this series work. Then he quit 5 days into making his 6th Fast movie. This production was already enormous before a single frame of trouble showed up. New stars, new stakes, new scale. Jason Momoa, Brie Larson, and Daniela Melchior were all joining for the first time, alongside Charlize Theron returning as Cypher. Cameras roll on Theron and Momoa first. Everything looks fine. Cinematographer Stephen Winden later said that by that Friday, Lin was the happiest he'd ever seen him on set. By the following Tuesday, he was gone. Winden put it simply, "Whatever happened, it happened over that weekend. I never saw him after that. No public explanation. Just a vague line about creative differences, and a franchise scrambling for a new director, mid-shoot. The full story took years to surface. Reports pointed to deep tension between Lin and Diesel over the script itself. Diesel had been upset that an early draft cut his own sister's character. He posted about it publicly before filming even began. He wrote he was so disappointed, he couldn't continue. Lin's exit statement next to Diesel's social media post. Think about that. The lead actor is also the producer, and he's criticizing the script in public before a single new scene gets shot. That's not a director making his movie. That's a director working around a star who can overrule him in front of the entire fan base. Losing a director 5 days in isn't a footnote. It's a 5-alarm fire. Insiders estimated the delay cost Universal up to $1 million a day just to keep cast and crew waiting. Louis Leterrier got the call. A capable action director. But he walked into a story already half-built by someone else. A budget already spiraling. A star who'd just shown everyone who was really in charge. That's the movie Fast X was always going to be. Not because Leterrier failed, because the foundation was already cracked before he ever arrived. Here's where it gets worse. Fast X wasn't built as one movie. It was built as half of one, the first part of a 2-film finale. Shoot back-to-back, bank double the box office while the franchise was hot. Furious 7 had returned roughly 700% on its budget. So Universal looked at that number and made a simple bet. Do it again, but bigger. Fast X's budget ballooned to an estimated $378.8 million. That's more expensive than Titanic, more expensive than Avatar, nearly double Furious 7's. For a story that wasn't even complete on its own. And for a while, Universal genuinely wasn't sure the movie would make that money back. And in May 2023, it opened to $320 million worldwide. The second biggest global debut of that year. For about a week, the bet looked like it had worked. But then the drop came. By its third weekend, it fell 60% domestically, 52% internationally, in a single week. That's not a hold, that's a free fall. Compare that to Furious 7. It held so well it became the fourth highest-grossing film of all time, weeks after release. Fast X never had that staying power. It made its money in one giant burst, and the audience walked. It finished its run at $714.4 million worldwide, fifth biggest film of the entire year. That sounds enormous. And against the wrong number, it would be. But one industry estimate said the film needed $800 to $850 million worldwide just to break even. That's after marketing costs got added on top of the $378 million budget. It didn't get there. Not close. Variety later reported the film barely crawled into the black. Real profit came months later, through home video and streaming. A $714 million worldwide hit. And it almost lost the studio money outright. No headline-grabbing flop here, no viral disaster. Just a slow, quiet collapse of the math that used to make this franchise work. And Fast X ended on a cliffhanger. Dom and his own son, in danger, mid-explosion, story unresolved. That sequel was supposed to answer it within a year or two. It's been 3 years. And right now, that sequel doesn't even have a finished script. There's one more number worth sitting with before we move on. Fast X opened in China to $78.3 million. That's a huge number for any Hollywood movie, in a market that's grown increasingly resistant to American films. But here's the catch. China only returns a fraction of box office revenue to the studio that made the film. Most of that money never makes it back to Universal at all. Strip away China, and the international numbers get a lot less comforting. The cushion this franchise has relied on for a decade is thinner than the box office charts suggest. We'll get to why. But first, you need to see exactly what broke. Here's the part that, 3 years later, still feels unbelievable. Universal spent $378 million creating that cliffhanger. Then it got afraid to spend the money required to resolve it. That's not a production problem. That's what panic looks like at a corporate level. Reports indicate Universal paused the follow-up after Fast X's weak returns and rising budget concerns. The same studio that greenlit the cliffhanger got cold feet about paying to resolve it. That's not a sequel in development. That's a hostage situation. And the hostage is your own ending. Maybe that's why nothing after Furious 7 ever felt quite real again, no matter how much money got thrown at it. What happened next is almost funny, if it weren't so revealing. The 11th film was teased for April 2025, then 2026, then April 2027, then finally March 2028 under a brand new title. Fast X, Part 2, then Fast 11, then Fast X, Part 2 again. Then, in 2026, Fast Forever. Some of that delay came from outside the franchise entirely. The 2023 Hollywood strikes shut down productions across the industry, including this one, for months. But strikes don't explain 5 years. They explain maybe one of them. The rest came from somewhere closer to home. As late as 2026, reports describe the script as still being polished. Years after the project had a release date, years after Diesel had already announced a title, a script still being rewritten, years into pre-production, isn't a script that's almost ready. It's a script that was never actually finished in the first place. 5 years between movie 10 and movie 11. The longest gap in franchise history. Longer than the break after Tokyo Drift, almost double. And this isn't a passion project taking its time. This is a cliffhanger. Fans have been left hanging, by design, for half a decade, not knowing if a child character lives or dies. We've gotten so used to franchise delays that 5 years just sounds like Tuesday now. It isn't. It's a production that, for years, didn't know if it would finish its own story. The money problem never went away. It just got quieter. Reports indicate Universal demanded the final film's budget be cut significantly, even if that meant trimming cast members from the finale. Think about what that means for a franchise built entirely on the word family. 2 decades of trailers. One word, repeated every time. And now the accountants are quietly deciding who stays at the table. And while the studio tries to trim the cast down, Diesel has been doing the opposite, adding to it. In December 2025, Diesel announced that footballer Cristiano Ronaldo would have a role in the finale. One of the most famous athletes on the planet, joining a franchise that's already struggling to afford its own actors. When a project starts failing, most studios cut back. Diesel's instinct was the opposite: make it bigger. Which, ironically, was the exact instinct that built this franchise in the first place. Think about what that signals: a studio telling the production to cut costs, and a lead actor publicly recruiting global celebrities for cameo roles at the same time. That's not a production tightening its belt together. That's two different visions of the same movie, running in two different directions at once. It's the exact same dynamic that pushed Justin Lin out the door back in 2022. A producer star making big public moves, while the people actually managing the budget scramble to keep up behind him. There's a part of this story that's harder to talk about cleanly. Diesel has said the final film will bring back Paul Walker's character. The one last scene driving off into the sunset after Walker's death in 2013. How do you bring back an actor who's been gone for over a decade? Probably the same way Furious 7 did. Archival footage, repurposed. A body double, likely one of his brothers. Again. Careful visual effects, built to avoid the uncanny valley that nearly broke those scenes the first time. Fans are split. Hard. Some have said publicly they won't pay for a film that brings Walker back this way. They call it profiting off a man who can't consent anymore. Others call it the goodbye the character never fully got. No clean answer here. Just a franchise spending 3 years looking for one, while its own emotional credibility keeps draining away. So here's where this lands. The one fact that explains the last 3 years better than any other. This isn't a franchise that made one bad movie and got punished for it. Marvel's made bad movies. DC's made worse ones. Those franchises kept moving anyway. This is different. This is a franchise that bet everything on its biggest budget ever. Its most expensive cliffhanger ever. All on the assumption that audiences would simply show up the same way they always had. And the audience didn't disappear. $320 million in one opening weekend proves people still wanted this story. What disappeared was the studio's confidence that finishing it was worth the risk they'd already taken. That's the real failure. Not a bomb, not a viral disaster. A blank check the people holding it got too scared to cash. 3 years running. So where does that leave things 3 years after a director walked off set without a word? Let's close the loops. One by one. The cliffhanger, still unresolved. Dom and his son, frozen mid-explosion since May of 2023. Anyone expecting answers within a year has now waited 3 times that long. The script Diesel fought for, the one that started all of this, reportedly being rewritten by multiple new writers, years after that original fight with Lin. And Justin Lin, the man who built 5 of these movies, hasn't directed a frame of it since, not after quitting 5 days into shooting his 6th. When he finally spoke publicly, over a year later, he kept it vague. No bitterness, no details. Just a quiet wish that the characters could speak for the franchise instead of him. That's almost sadder than anger would have been. As for the title that finally stuck, Fast Forever, announced in January 2026, locked for March 2028. There's something almost too fitting about that name. Forever delayed, forever rewritten, forever waiting on a script that doesn't exist yet. In May 2026, Diesel appeared at the Cannes Film Festival for a 25th anniversary screening of the very first film. Michelle Rodriguez was there. So was Jordana Brewster. So was Meadow Walker, Paul's own daughter, standing where her father once stood. 2,500 people packed into one theater for one film, 25 years after it first played. Diesel later wrote that he'd never felt anything quite like it. That same festival once gave a broke, unknown actor 20 minutes of screen time. Now it was calling that movie a classic. He gave Meadow Walker a long embrace on that stage. He told the crowd the fans are the only reason this franchise is finishing at all. 25 years, almost to the day, since 2 strangers met over a street race and a stolen truck of DVD players. But here's the echo worth coming back to. The one this whole story has been circling. It started with a number, $1.5 billion. Furious 7's peak, built on a real, unscripted tragedy nobody saw coming. Every movie since then has chased that number with bigger stunts and bigger budgets. instead of asking what actually made it land in the first place. It wasn't the cars, it wasn't the explosions. It was that, for one movie, the danger felt real. The family on screen felt real, because the grief behind the camera was real too. You can't buy that with $378 million. You can only spend your way around not having it. And that's exactly what this franchise has done for 3 straight years. Left with a 4th title change and a lead villain still waiting on his script. So is Fast and Furious dead? No. It has a release date, most of its cast, and a studio still willing to take Vin Diesel's word that, this time, it's really coming. But still alive and still working aren't the same thing. Right now, this is a franchise running on fumes from a decade ago, hoping nobody notices the engine stalled out back in 2022. If you made it this far, you already know this isn't the kind of channel that just recaps what everyone already knows. Every video here is going to be this kind of breakdown. The real story behind why something that looked unstoppable quietly fell apart. The business decisions, the ego, the money, the human behavior underneath all of it. This is the first one. If it was worth your time, subscribe. The next one is already in the works, and it goes just as deep. Either way, thanks for watching this one.